Does everyone in the call from Philly live in Philly?
I'm right outside Philly.
Yeah, I live in Center City, Philly.
I'm getting back. Oh, hey, Shane.
Hey, how's it going?
Shane's my research collaborator at Wharton. I'm about to move back to Philly. I can't wait.
Where are you from? Where are you? You're in Florida.
Yeah, I've been living with family for the past few months, taking advantage of the remote working.
What part of Florida are you in?
Just north of Jacksonville.
Great.
So nice weather, not too bad.
Yeah. It must be.
Well, I guess I can just start kind of what I wanted this to be was really a round table, and I have a list of kind of topics having to do with foot traffic measurement. It's something that comes up a lot in my work. So I'll talk a little bit about me, and hopefully Shane, since you're here, you can chime in a little bit.
Sure.
And yeah, and then I'll have kind of questions to go around the room as well. And if I can figure out how to share some visualizations, I will. Otherwise, I'll just kind of talk about it. So a little bit about me. So I am a planner turned data analyst. So I did a lot of master planning in my work. I've done a lot of hospitals, higher education, master plans, campus planning, and I found that within my work there was a lot of data, and I really was enjoying working with and learning a lot about the institutions and the companies I was working for, and wanted to get a little bit better with data fluency. So that is what I do now, and I work with Shane. I work with the Wharton School. There's an urban analytics group there, and we work on some projects that involve criminology within urban areas, but also with business vibrancy within urban areas, and we advise some business enterprise groups on how to measure impact analysis and to find out kind of how they're doing, how a program might be doing. So something that we've found that comes up a lot is this sort of missing data, and that is foot traffic, kind of pedestrian flow. And it comes up in a lot of different scenarios. So potential uses that we found, for example, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, they actually use it they use sensors to understand how many people are using their trails. So they actually have an eco counter placed all over the city, and I have a map that I can share after this if you're interested to understand how many people are using their trails. And they've actually taken those counters around the city to understand where are all the walkers in Philadelphia. So they have a database with that information, and we've used it quite a bit. Another thing that I've found is that a lot of companies like retail, small business retailers, they want to know how many people are walking by on any given day so that they know what is our conversion rate. So how many people are walking by versus how many people are coming into our store versus how many people are buying things. That's a very important thing for them, and they don't always have an easy way of accessing that data. So something like a collaboration between a planning commission that uses these sensors and a group, a business enterprise group, is a pretty worthwhile collaboration in some cases. Another thing that we've found is that if an enterprise group is investing a lot in a certain downtown area, in storefronts and in small businesses, they want to see, does this attract more people to a certain area, and can we measure that? So we're finding that that is also in demand. Also, response to invitations to events, to kind of call to action for people within a community. Do a lot of people actually show up to certain things? And also in my research with Wharton, the Urban Analytics Group measures criminology, and we measure a specific theory within criminology, which is routine activity theory, saying that if there are a lot of people around and certain variables about your environment, is it less likely to be unsafe? Are you less likely to commit a crime in an area with a lot of people, for example, or does the opposite happen? So we have this kind of missing data that we have ended up kind of creating proxies for rather than actually having a true measurement. So some of those proxies actually ended up being pretty interesting. Like we measured how many hours businesses were open to kind of get a proxy for how busy an area is. Google has all kinds of metrics for that. So we ended up kind of using these proxies rather than that measurement, but it keeps coming up in our research. So we keep trying to figure out what sorts of methods there are to do this. Does anyone have any questions so far?
This is fascinating.
Very fascinating. Very important for economic development.
I'm definitely interested how this all changed with COVID, with people staying home more.
Yeah, and that is also another thing. There's going to be so much research with how this has impacted business life and downtown life, and so this kind of counting is so important to measure kind of how the public is feeling about certain things that are happening in the city and what's going on. So
hospitality has been so impacted by COVID worldwide, and employment around it. And just look at how they pivoted to like takeouts and all that, and that's all about foot traffic.
Mm-hmm. And for me, I mean, I think one of the things that I really love about kind of this focus of the research is, so much of kind of, I think, the evaluation of kind of different things in the city are focused on crime and safety, because that's an important issue to everybody, obviously, but it's also partly just because crime is kind of measured very, we already have the kind of data on that. The police collect that data, and there's biases in that data and all that type of stuff. But foot traffic to me kind of represents sort of a way of kind of collecting data beyond just kind of like, because you can measure kind of aspects of like, parks or basically public activity that aren't necessarily always connected just to crime. I mean, crime is only one kind of measure of what's going on in a city, and if you can kind of have alternative kind of measures that are more about kind of like sort of like just kind of the public use or even kind of public kind of like well-being of a neighborhood beyond just crime, I think that's just very valuable in giving kind of a more kind of complete picture of what day-to-day life in a neighborhood is beyond just the safety kind of aspect of things.
And that reminds me of the vacant lot greening, actually studies that are looking at vacant lots being turned into small parks and measuring the impact of that.
That's a great program. They're doing that in a lot of different cities. I think it's a great idea as a gardener. Also, when I think of the city, I think of how
This topic interests me because I design sidewalks as well as roads. So I'm always interested in pedestrian movements, and do people actually use the sidewalk? Do people actually use the crosswalk? Can you get to that business by walking?
What do do you find that you want that data but you can't find it? Or has anyone ever kind of asked you for?
No, because most of the things I design, it's client driven.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we do like the 5-foot sidewalk. I mean, only when you know your head counts are really high do you make your sidewalk 10 feet wide. Or
definitely.
You definitely need head counts in that situation. I mean, I also design trails, and accessibility is always important when you talk about pedestrians.
Do you have any, so the methods that we've seen, and if you have any other kind of ideas, it would be great to hear them, but we've seen, so for example, the eco counters that are used in Philadelphia are infrared only, and they basically take the heat of a person going by, and there's no sort of individual data about a person that's being collected. It's just that there is a person there. And then there's a piezometric strip that goes across to measure the bicycle, so it can differentiate between a person walking and a person on a bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
But in the past, I've seen a lot of different technologies. There's some that are piezometric pads that they're pressure pads, like if you're walking and you step on them, then they give a count.
Do people step over these things or around them to avoid them?
I'm sure they do. Sometimes they're combined with those the rubber bumpy kind of things that you walk down for the blind, that like when you're
yeah, deductible warning strips.
Yes, but sometimes they're combined with that. At least in Australia, I've seen that. And Placemeter actually will take facial recognition from cameras that are mounted on buildings or security cameras, and they'll actually do facial recognition and say that is a person, so it'll count from that technology.
It's so Big Brother.
And that, to me, is very scary. So I wanted to get other people's opinions on that, if they've seen that and if that scares them, or what your thoughts are on it, because I don't know how successful those technologies are. They're probably the most accurate, unfortunately.
Well, and I mean, I think that's why I kind of like this kind of, in general, I'm very interested in kind of like foot traffic technology, especially almost kind of some of these lower tech ones like the piezometric or like, the infrared. I mean, those are not lower tech than like facial recognition or anything like that, because, I think when we're talking about like kind of trying to measure or collect data on sort of use of public spaces in general by people, there's there's an immediate kind of trade-off there between kind of actually getting informative data, but also kind of respecting the privacy of people that are using public, like, people using public spaces shouldn't, kind of feel this sort of sense that they're being watched or monitored or tracked or whatever like that. And so, I mean, I think, kind of one branch of the technology for measuring public use is more like, oh, well, people already carrying their phones, let's just kind of track that and like collect data on that. And I think that kind of part is going to make lots of people, including myself, kind of uncomfortable. And so, like, I've always gravitated towards sort of these like kind of data collection mechanisms for public use, like foot traffic centers that are almost like inherently anonymized, so that there's no real kind of concern with this kind of tracking of individuals. You're really kind of just doing kind of aggregate counts of people occupying particular areas. There's obviously a trade-off there. You can't ever get as high resolution data because, in some ways it would be even more informative if you could kind of watch how people move around the city and sort of see what choices they make transit-wise and like what, and all that stuff. But then you're kind of not, then you're starting to kind of get into the uncomfortable area of kind of privacy as well. So I think it's just a fascinating topic, kind of this trade-off between privacy and how informative the data is. But I kind of like these sort of more foot traffic solutions that are less about tracking individual people.
So you like
Totally.
So you like the patterns, being able to see the patterns.
Yeah, the patterns, but like, you know, at some aggregate level where like there's no you could never kind of associate with any one individual person, but like kind of like, you know, I mean, I always sort of like when I want to kind of, if I wanted to kind of measure the use of a public area, like, you know, if I want to sort of say like, hey, does this newly greened vacant lot bring more people, like there are more people hanging around there than there used to be, you know, I at least would only be kind of comfortable working with sort of aggregate data where it's like the count of number of people. Like I don't need to know who those people are or necessarily where they came from. On some level that would be even more informative data, but it's starting to get into an area that I'm kind of uncomfortable kind of having that level of data. Only because, you know, if I can have that level of data, then a whole bunch of other people, you know, with maybe less scruples about how they would use it would also be able to have that data.
Yeah.
As a planner, it's hard to be the face of that too, to say we're going to do an existing conditions assessment, we're going to do some traffic analysis for your pedestrian counts, and we're taking individual data. It's very hard for me to be that face and say we're doing that. It's as a professional planner, I'd rather say we're not collecting any individual data. You know, we're not doing anything like that. So it's partially selfish for me because it's easier for me to do my work that way.
It's more generalized.
Yeah. I put a link in the chat, and because I unfortunately don't understand freeconferencecall.com technology, but there are some visualizations in there, including the map of the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission's map of their sensor network, which is pretty vast at this point. And I did a quick analysis of what the walk score. So walk score doesn't have anything to do with counting pedestrians, but what it does is it is a proxy that's now owned by a real estate company. And I'm sure that most people in this chat probably have heard of walk score, but it basically takes a radius around a point, and it says, you know, how many public transportation stops, how many parks, how many small businesses, how many walkable amenities are there within a half-a-mile radius, and that it'll give you a score based on that number. Basically, how great is it to be a walker in this area? And so I did a quick analysis on each of the Planning Commission's points and their sensor network, and whether walk score correlated with the actual walkers in those areas. And some of the findings were really interesting in that, let me find that page real quick, that it wasn't particularly interesting in that there wasn't a strong correlation overall, except for between the walk score of 60 and the walk score of about 95. There was a pretty strong correlation between the walk score and the actual pedestrian count. But once you got above a walk score of 95, which is an excellent area for walkers, it found that the actual counts actually kind of ran the gamut. There was, you know, upwards of 13,000 annual average pedestrians, or daily pedestrians, or there were only like 1,000. So it wasn't it's not a great predictor necessarily, but when I looked into the outliers in that analysis, I found some interesting things. So, of course, where the walk score is low, but the count of pedestrians is high, there were specific events happening, or trailheads, or one or two businesses that had really strong pull, gathering like a lot of pedestrians. So, for example, the arenas, hospitals, some interesting, like Cherry Street Pier has a lot of people, but a low walk score. So what I could find from that was that that's actually going to tell you that there's a lot of opportunity for developing pedestrian amenity where there isn't. And then In the other direction, there's where the walk score is really high, but there aren't very many pedestrians being counted. Why is such an area that's got so much amenity doesn't have very many people? That was really interesting too, because it was kind of what designers and planners will tell you never to do, which is put a flat parking lot in the middle of a city, or put a long block put no entrances to a building on a whole block, or kind of put a side street with parking lot only on one side. So those findings were kind of interesting in that the deviations actually said much more than any sort of correlation between those two things. Does that make sense to anyone, or does anyone have questions?
It makes sense. I'm sorry I got cut off there. My laptop shut down, and so I've switched to my iPhone. I just want to say I'm happy that you're using these technologies in the city, because I think Philadelphia is a great walking city.
I agree. I think it's amazing, and that's why I want to be there.
I walk plenty when I'm there, and just in the 10 years that I've been back from living in Boston, I can't believe the amount of accelerator growth there is around the new Whole Foods in the museum area on the Parkway. That whole area has always been walkable, but the amount of activity now around there that's community-based is just amazing to me.
On the Parkway?
Up at the Benjamin Franklin Parkway.
Okay.
Up near
near the new Barnes Museum and everything like that. It's right around there.
Yeah.
Edwin had a huge fight about moving that Barnes from Marion, but it was a really part of an economic development plan where it's attracting people to the museum area, and it's just still really walkable. But there's a lot you can see and do now.
Yeah.
No, and they've done a tremendous amount, kind of like, the Boathouse Row, and kind of in behind the art museum there also. I mean, that was always, I think, a relatively because that bike trail's been there for a while, but, they've been doing a lot more pop-up events kind of in that area that's, I think, encouraging a little bit more public use as well.
Yeah, I mean, before the pandemic, there was something on the Parkway pretty much every weekend.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
I have family that lives right by the Parkway, and don't go over there in the summer. It's just, I mean, last summer was an exception, of course, like 4th of July, Labor Day, Made in America. There's so many, and then there's all the 5Ks and the marathons and that Whole Foods is a gold mine, in my opinion.
What did you say?
The Whole Foods is a gold mine. There's just not now, but before the pandemic, there's just so many people on the Parkway for all these activities, as well as just normal recreation.
It used to be a food desert over there, so it was a really good idea. And
yeah, the Whole Foods was around the corner, but now it's less hidden. It was closer to the library. And now it's very obvious. They have all this takeout there. They have alcohol. They put alcohol there. So besides being an excellent store,
it's a really good thing. And it's just it promotes public transit, and it promotes walking. It promotes the public. It promotes the arts. It promotes walking and fitness. And how they're extending that trail that you're referring to, that's having the pop-ups, they're sending that further down into Southwest Philly, and you can actually go from now, eventually be able to go from like Southwest Philly all the way to Valley Forge on that trail.
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic, and I'm a member of the art museum. I just love being there too. It's just seeing all the changes there. And walking is a big part of it. I walk everywhere I go, and meaning as a fitness thing, as a way of life. And I mean, I drive and I use public transit, but I try to walk every day, and I really notice how much I appreciate what a walkable city Philadelphia is.
It's also relatively flat too.
It's so flat, but it's also so green. That was his vision. That was Williamson's vision, to keep it a green city.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the parks are so important.
Mm-hmm. Sorry. Rachel, Jim, when you talk about the street data and the walkable data, is there an application to the 15-minute city concept?
Absolutely. I don't know exactly. So the 15-minute city, to me, is kind of an ideal. I don't know about you, but I think that the kind of drawing that radius and having every kind of amenity that you can have within walking distance, I think is for the right client or for the right partnership with the city. I think that this could be applied to that. Not sure if that answers the question, but
yeah. What got me thinking was Teresa's conversation about Philadelphia being a great walkable city. Yet, we still need to take mass transit or a car or something to get to places. And the 15-minute city is within some concentric circle of 15 minutes for a walk, bike, and ride. You have 87% of what you need to do in your life. And I was just wondering if the data that you're collecting, the studies you're working on, can be used in either the design, the urban design of the 15-minute city, or the justification for 15-minute city and investments in neighborhoods.
I think absolutely. And so using walk score and then also calibrating that with maybe a denser circle, calibrating that with sort of the annual average daily pedestrian count can actually start to highlight the areas that need a little bit of work to create that ideal. So just the walk score alone, it can say whether or not an area is walkable, but this sort of combination of data could tell you what's close and what does this one area need to be able to be more walkable, and what's missing really.
Yeah. As a specific case like that, a couple of people have mentioned, this concept of like I think an important part of the story, an important specific part of the story is like food deserts and stuff like that. Like, one way in which that kind of North Museum district was kind of like really, some of that vibrancy I think was encouraged was that, there's a lot more kind of there's like a lot more cafes and like, that Whole Foods was a big part of it, but there's like a lot more kind of cafes, etc. And you can you could imagine one way of kind of like trying to identify kind of food deserts and stuff like that is you go to where, certain neighborhoods, and you can obviously measure kind of distance, just kind of distance of, average distance to the nearest grocery store and stuff like that. But you could also, for example, put some, kind of sensors outside of things like grocery stores and say like, well, what proportion of people are driving out of here as opposed to walking out of here? Like, and if they're not, if there isn't a lot of foot traffic going back and forth into these particular like food locations, can we do something about like that? Can kind of like the transit network be kind of adapted a little bit to make that a little bit more of a walkable situation?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when she mentioned the neighborhood around the Whole Foods. Think of south of Philly, south of Washington. there are a number of places on Washington, and there's the Italian market, but there is no, I would say, mainstream grocery store. The people that live in those neighborhoods are relegated to shopping at CVS and the corner store. And I think that's problematic for the people in those neighbors.
Yeah, it makes, even though there's a lot of potential for it being walkable, a lot of people in South Philly are still dependent on cars and still have cars, even though the area really has all the makings to be to fill most of your needs without. It's dense. It's got short blocks. It's got some trees. It's got a lot of businesses and zoning for businesses, but it doesn't have everything. So a lot of people south of Washington still need a car for a lot of their life. I mean, I don't, but and I've lived there for a long time, but it has not always been easy to live kind of in far South Philly without one.
No, and I mean, I think it's also that, I think in a little bit, in some more kind of disadvantaged neighborhoods, it's not just sort of access to some type of food, but it's also are there kind of, because I think in a lot of kind of more impoverished neighborhoods, there's food access, but it's often it's like only fast food, or it's only it's not, I think another kind of very, potentially very positive impact of these kind of vacant lot, the kind of greening projects and kind of making these urban gardens, is it actually also would potentially not just kind of alleviate food deserts, but specifically alleviate food deserts in that you're kind of providing almost kind of a local, potentially walkable or at least accessible source of, healthier food than you typically kind of get through kind of the free market, because often that ends up being kind of sort of fast food type situations and stuff like that.
I'm all for it.
And I want to kind of check in on it. I was reading, but this is a couple of years ago now, about, Detroit is doing a lot more even kind of larger scale, urban farming type thing, where, they've got even vaster kind of neighborhoods that are less occupied now. And so they're kind of doing a little bit more urban farming on an even larger scale than Philadelphia kind of has space for. And it'd be kind of interesting. I want to kind of check back on that and sort of see if there's been a lot of success as far as how much of that urban farming is actually kind of going to the local residents around there, as opposed to, just kind of being, I don't know, exported elsewhere, back out to the suburbs or something like that.
I love the idea
of urban farm. Yeah, I suspect most of the output of an urban farm is consumed by these farm-to-table specialty restaurants.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it can't be scaled. I just think it hasn't been scaled yet for commercial use, right?
Yeah.
Something that we did in our park over here was for growing raspberries and other little berry plants so people can eat the berries at the park.
Great idea.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So yeah, but one of the raspberry bushes didn't survive, but I think another one's a blackberry bush. But yeah, people are hungry, they can eat the fruit from the park, if they feel like it's safe. But it should be safe, but
I see community gardening that's part of classes at Blackmore College, and the students actually do make sure the produce gets to good use, either by the student population or to food pantries. And I've attended things on Capitol Hill where I advocate when I'm going there, when it's open for the pandemic, where the state of Wisconsin does a lot of that kind of community gardening right in public schools, and a lot of greening projects in public schools. So I think the crossover to the foot data and integrating both community development and educational development. I think that there's a lot of potential there. It's just amazing that we can't get food right in this country. I have nieces and nephews at campuses where I'm amazed at how dormitory life is just full of issues around food deserts. Those food plans are terrible food plans. They're expensive, and they're not good food, and it leaves students who want to go to supermarkets in an area in a way that's just challenging. And it's across institutions and across places.
I think even
that's the value of becoming a grad student.
That is, but
I'm being a bit of a smartass,
but some of the undergrads move in that direction faster because of it.
People have been getting food by mail too with the pandemic.
Yes, they have.
It kind of doesn't matter where you are regarding your nieces and nephews. I mean, I know my parents, like my dad, buys all sorts of food on Amazon.
Amazon's a game changer for sure. I do a lot of care packages to my nephews.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I'm amazed still how difficult that is.
Yeah.
Like how we planned all this stuff and set it up was really impractical with regards to basics like food.
Well, I don't think it was planned so much; it just kind of happened, right? And
I don't think it. I think it was planned for marginal gouging. And you're not teaching kids how to cook, like how to prepare basic food and acquire it easily. That's a really important life skill, and we're delaying that by the way we set up food at schools. Just a real eye-opener. I didn't live in a dorm, and then when I did live on my own, I lived in a foreign country for a year getting a master's, and I learned really quickly how to adapt to getting my food every day, how to go to local shops and cook and all that stuff. But it's just, I think it's a really interesting problem.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the last frontier of improving the student experience, improving food choices.
Jim, we're getting you in stereo, right?
I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but, if you look at where the money's been spent in higher education over the last 20 to 30 years, it's primarily outside of the classroom to upgrade just what I would call the student experience. When I went to undergrad, if you wanted to work out, it was in a smelly gym that was shared by 27 varsity sports teams and so forth, right? And high humidity, and now it's we have $100 million gyms with rows and rows of cardiovascular machines. I used to joke about when I went and lived in the dorm, the cafeteria had one choice, and it was the same thing all week until it ran out. Now the kids can walk in and have cuisines of the world. I don't mean to be derogatory, because I went to Penn for grad school, so I've watched this at Penn, the spending and the staffing over the last 40 years, certainly at the undergraduate level. You talk about foot traffic. Undergraduates have not changed. The number of undergraduates have not changed in 40 years, within plus or minus a couple hundred. But the number of people on staff to support the undergraduates has just exploded. And like I said, it's not in the classroom spending, it's about enhancing the experience in some way.
Yeah, I mean, at Penn,
luxury.
At the time I've been at Wharton, the staff kind of hires has been like 4 times faculty hires. Like, it really is kind of outpay. And, there's, part of that is just bureaucracy begets bureaucracy. But, it's also, and I do think, I think it's a great point because, so much, especially a lot of our kind of discussions at the university this year specifically, these last couple of years during COVID, has been very focused on kind of the mental health of our students, because that's something that is kind of an obvious struggle for everybody, especially during COVID times. But I do think kind of like one kind of knob that can kind of be turned a little bit in mental health is also acknowledging how physical health ties into that, and that's not something that's necessarily, you know, acknowledged or kind of addressed very often. But I do think, you know, things like improving the dining, just kind of the health aspect of the dining at the university could have a lot of sort of maybe somewhat intangible, but like I think could have a lot of impact on some of the kind of most obvious kind of like sort of, you know, negative aspects of the university experience, which is the mental health challenges and all that type of stuff. So
well, it's a really basic form of integrative care to be doing that, and that's the direction we sort of need to go in, and the pandemic has kind of illustrated that because of the rise in the kind of stress level and anxiety level that we're all experiencing. But I think basic nutrition is really important to your brain health. And I think that's why I do so many care packages. I think it's why I pay attention to it with the kids, because they're all really good students and good kids, and I want them to have a good undergraduate experience. And food is, as an aunt, a way to show that you care, but it's also a way to help them build the skill set on taking care of themselves, you know. It's just so expensive to get educated, and I'm always amazed that I'm dealing with these basic issues, you know. I'm like, how did we miss the basic issue of good nutrition and sitting around, you know, rituals that are important to human beings, especially when you're busy and studying and on deadline, you know. And I have to say to you, these gyms are a big investment, but the kids use them, and I think that's a good, healthy thing.
Another thing regarding food and pedestrians is folks are taking fewer trips to the stores.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, in some places, people would do their shopping every day or every 2 days, right? Talking about pedestrian trips. And now maybe it's every week, every 2 weeks, people are shopping for food. So that definitely impacts pedestrians.
Yeah, can I interrupt for a second? We are 2 minutes over. So, Rachel, if you have anything you want to say to wrap up, I encourage that.
No, I mean, this has been really fun, so thank you everyone for coming and sharing your ideas.
yeah, it was super great talking with you all. This was really interesting.
Same here. I think Helene's right. I think our patterns are different based on COVID. Being a foodie myself, I would have a 5 or 6 shop routine before, and now I'm down to 1 shop locally, and then once a month I'll go out to the Trader Joe's. So I think it's just about being careful and trying to limit exposure. But thank you so much for sharing your expertise, and please keep up the good work.
Rachel, thank you from TransportationCamp PHL for sharing your IP, and look forward to you participating next year with some of your findings.
Thank you, definitely.
All right. Thank you. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Bye-bye.